I want to invite 4 fantastic people for a panel, the last 10 minutes we have of this session. One of them is Teresa Lindholm, up in the corner here. She works with white architects as an ethnologist and with social sustainability. But you've also worked both with local governments and with central governments when it comes to gender and inclusion. The second one is Tomaj Kivani, who works as the local area coordinator in Botkyrka, one of the municipalities south of Stockholm. What I love about you is that you really have one foot in communities and one foot in local government. You have the difficult task of translating everything that the government plans into the community and translating what the community thinks up to to local government.
You can imagine how confused I am.
I also want to invite Sheila Patel. Sheila started up the Indian NGO Spark, which works with urban poor communities, and you're one of the founding members of SDI. And I think you're the person I know who has the most important voice globally when it comes to raising awareness of the issue of urban poverty, informality and inclusion to the international community. And also to Åsa Winfridsson, who works with the City of Stockholm as a prevention coordinator for drugs and abuse. I have some short questions for the 4 of you, but I also want to pick up questions from the floor. So you can try to keep your responses relatively short. I'll do that. I'll just point to my watch like this. Teresa, I'm thinking of starting with you because you've sat on all 3 chairs of central, local and consulting. And I sometimes get the feeling that Swedish local governments are a little bit scared of testing new approaches. Nils talked about the new situation we are in our cities and the need to actually test new things. And my question is, are we too scared of testing new things, of learning from India and South Africa, and Nigeria and Kenya? Or are there signs that this is somehow already happening?
Well, both yes and yes. I would definitely say that we are a bit too scared to try new methods and new angles. But also things are happening. I would say, for example, you mentioned before when we talked social contracts is something that is increasing in Sweden, in Stockholm especially. I think 40% during just 1 year. The social contracts is basically when the municipality rents an apartment and then rents it out to someone who would otherwise have difficulties having a contract for an apartment. So things are happening, but we have a long way to go. I think we have a long tradition of a very strong welfare state with caring for our citizens, but it's very top-down. And our municipalities aren't very well equipped to meet and respond to initiatives from the bottom. And we have a lot of NGOs, but most of them have been based on maybe ethnicity or hobbies such as sports or cultural activities, not on a territorial basis. But that is also happening now in some of our suburbs. These organizations are many times seen as some kind of a threat. But I was supposed to be short, so
okay.
I'll stop there.
Maybe I turn to you then, Tomaj, because you've been sitting there in that role as the extended arm of the local government on site and trying to translate decisions and needs from different groups. What do you think it takes to build trust between the local government and the communities in the places where you've been working?
Well, one of the biggest challenges that I've met is that I've been working 4 years in an area called Norsborg. And Norsborg is one of these areas in Stockholm where you have a lot of transit people. It's a transit place, especially the rental apartments, where we have maybe, I don't remember the exact figure, but maybe 20% of the population is changed every year. So what we lack there is the social capital, that people are willing to invest their social capital in this area. if you're not going to stay in an area for more than a couple of years, if you have the ambition to move to another place, you won't care as much about your local area. You won't get to know your local politician. You don't have the interest to get involved in the local politics. So that is one of the biggest challenges that we have had. Like, we are trying to engage some of the people, we can engage them, but some, well, they're going to move in 3 years' time, as soon as they're finished with their, getting higher up in the social hierarchy in Stockholm. So I would say that social capital and the willingness of the people to invest that social capital, that's a challenge in some of our areas here in Stockholm.
And I'm guessing that's the same challenge that you're often facing, not because people don't want to stay, but because they're afraid that they cannot. So how much are you willing to invest in a place where you don't know your future, if you don't have security of tenure? Are you safe to stay there, or will you have to move? And how much am I willing to invest in that uncertain situation? Also, you worked in Östberga in Stockholm, and you tried working with co-creation between politicians and civil servants and communities. How has that worked, and how do you think, when you listen to the presentations from Joseph, Sonia and Rose, is that different in a marginalized area in Stockholm compared to other places?
Of course, it's different in one perspective. But I think we have more in common than that's differs. What we realized when we started to work to co-create, at first we were listening to different perspectives about. We were working with safety issues in this area, and when we were listening around with the citizens, with the people who work in this area, with the politicians, the civil servants, we could see that the people who work with the area, not necessarily within the area, but they have responsibilities in this area, they were much more negative to the area than the people who were living in it. And that was a clue for us to see that we were kind of structure. We have to co-create with the people who are living in the area, because when we're doing this, that's also what we noticed. The solutions is much better, and it's much more for the needs with the people who are living in the area. But it's also that we got much less vandalism when we are doing the things, because the people who live there and co-created these solutions, they're much more owner of their own area.
I'm going to end with a really difficult question for you before I leave the questions for the audience. And that is, if you could give your top tips to Sweden. The title of this morning session is "What can Sweden learn and how can we learn?" And I know that you know Sweden reasonably well. What would be your top tips? What should we learn and how should we learn it?
I'm writing.
Okay. The first and most important thing is that it's absolutely dangerous to keep talking about social capital for the sake of social capital. It's also dangerous to talk about building communities for the sake of building communities. Poor people don't get organized for the celebration of being organized. They get organized because they can't do things by themselves. So if you produce a practical roadmap that helps people understand how to navigate the city. You were talking about people for 3 years. When we start working with communities, we first say, do you know your city? Do you know where your mayor sits? Do you know where the police station is? Do you know where all the infrastructure of the city lies? And if you take groups of people to go look at it, it's like a picnic, because most migrants only know what they can walk to. So if you understand the transport system, you understand how to navigate the city, it produces the first exposure to the new environment in which you're living. And the people you go to all these places become the group with whom you learn these things. You take all of us. We don't go to our neighborhood only to be with everybody else, but we talk to our neighbors so that we can have an exchange of some things that we can do together. So my first thing is, it's important to do practical things in a collective manner so that people learn from each other. The other important thing is, when people come to, when people are poor, when people feel disenfranchised, listening to their stories, which you were talking about, is very important. One of the first things that all of them do is they talk about their own stories. Both of them said, who am I? How did I get here? What are my problems? Are you going to listen to me? And in every group that we go to, I get goosebumps when I talk about it. Women learn most from each other's experiences, but we never give them a chance to talk. We lecture them. We talk to them about being trustful. So I have had the hard knocks of what Rose said yesterday about the university from my alumni. The women's group became so empowered that they used to tell me, no, just shut up and don't talk all this rubbish. You know? And the right to say that to a professional is a very important, and I would say that to all of you. The minute community women have a right to challenge you on what you tell them, what advice you give them, allow them to tell you something which is contradictory to your own imagery. Because as educated middle class professionals, we are trained to know what is good. I remember a conversation, you're an architect, are you?
I'm not an architect, actually.
Okay,
technologist.
so I don't know why I thought.
But I
you
work
were.
in an
That's why. So we had women who live on the pavements in 30 square feet, saying we want to imagine a house and all that. So being a professional, I got architects and planners, all my friends to come and talk. They fought with the women for 3 sessions to say, ventilation is the most important thing. So you should have these big windows. And the women said, shut up, we don't want to. And the young students weren't listening, because what women were saying is, we will always have small houses. They will be very close to each other. Big windows means people can look into my house. I don't have privacy. And most important, I don't have storage space which I need on the walls. So I'm just telling you that the right to oppose and to challenge you is a very important part of the trust building process. We talked about co-creation. Co-creation cannot happen unless people are allowed to challenge your paradigm. And you have the humility to acknowledge when it's wrong and the courage to fight when it's right. Because sometimes, you know, you become like a little carpet. You walk over me. You are the community. So we fight a lot. If I think something is right, I will challenge him. And if he's right, then finally we say whoever shouts the most wins. And they win. Because the other thing I want to tell you is that I'm very sorry that Jokin, who is the president of the federation, and Rose is all our mentors, is not well enough to be here today. And he would always tell me that when I have a meeting with a professional, there should be 25 people from the community to 1 person, because you people like to talk a lot. So if we don't like what you talk, we can just shout and shut you. That for us is how partnerships begin. That sometimes people don't have a logical argument to what we say as professionals for the mainstream knowledge that we have. So sometimes just screaming and shouting is a way of saying shut up. We have to take that in as a part of that process. But working with communities and municipalities is what community federations taught me. Because when I used to be in evictions, I used to hate my municipal commissioner. I used to give him lots of swear words. But what did the federation do when we were facing evictions? You go and sit outside his room and convince him that we have nowhere else to go. And I had to sit for the first time when I went to the commissioner's office. I had to sit for 6 days in a row from, say, Monday to Saturday before he deemed to call me inside. That's not the case today, but that was the case the first time. And We have to do all kinds of things to gain the trust, but when it happens, it's a very powerful relationship. So if you as a network of associations are doing this, we are happy to give you all our trade secrets. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We do have to break now, but can we do 2 questions from the floor, just if anybody has something they've really been dying to ask? You're with us, but okay, come on.
It's not a question, just to share. Yesterday we had a fantastic lunch at your organization, and one word that I'm going to take back, you're about to go into an election in a couple of months' time. We no longer use, certainly your organization no longer uses the word refugees or visitors. We call newcomers. As an SDI person, that's what I'm taking back.
Thank you. Anyone else? Okay, that's fine. Then please clap for the panel. Thank you all very much for coming here. I hope that this has spurred your interest of working more closely with the SDI. They will be here, so if you want to talk to them after this, they'll be around for a bit. You can always check out their website. You can always come talk to us and Salar if you're interested in knowing more about what we do. But thank you very much.